Hey y'all, so today we're going to dive back into chapter 8 and we're going to focus on trap number 6 and hopefully have time for trap number 7. So trap number 6 is called Cringing Before the Collective, Shadow Rebellion, and I really feel like it's an extension of trap number 5, so we're not going to spend quite as much time on that as I normally would, but let's dive in and see what it's got to offer for us. So it says, the child sneaks on the red shoes. Remember, these are the new pair of red shoes. Marches off to church, pays no attention to what swirls around her, is reviled by the community. Members of the village tell on her. She is chastised. The red shoes are taken away, but it's too late. She is hooked. The issue is not yet obsession, rather that the collective inspires and strengthens her inner starvation by demanding capitulation to its narrow values. You can try to have a secret life, but sooner or later the superego, a negative complex, and or the culture itself will hail down. It is hard to hide an unsanctioned something that you are ravenous about. It is hard to hide stolen pleasures, even when they are not nourishing ones. So, excuse me. I'm getting better though. Hope you guys are well. So remember that whatever is pushed into the shadow self can be either negative or positive aspects of us. And so this is such a complex topic. It's certainly not one that we can cover. It's just a tiny portion of this review in this video here. So I just encourage you, if you have interest, to study more about the shadow self and the shadow part of the psyche. But essentially, you know, when you're coming out of narcissistic abuse, a lot of times what has been pushed down into that shadow aspect of yourself are good things, because you really kind of had to do that, because they would use anything against you, anything at all that was meaningful, that was important, that was private, anything that would make you vulnerable in any way, anything special to you, they're going to latch on to, unfortunately, and use against you. And I'm sure, you know, like if you're coming out of it, you know this, you've experienced this already, right? And it's even harder when you feel like you're coming out and you think you have someone that that really cares about you, like a close friend or confidant, and you're the first thing you want to do is just, you know, sit with this person and have coffee and say, listen to what I've been through. And then when you try to start explaining these experiences, you know, they start, you can tell, you know, even if they're trying to be supportive, they're not gonna really grasp it. And it's on top of that hard to believe. And so it can really put a strain, I feel like, on your relationships with friends. And so I just caution you to be really careful who you share your experiences with. And I have just found that those who have been through similar situations are the ones who are going to be most supportive. And so just be careful. And so you just learn to keep a lot to yourself. And it just reminds me of, you know, Stevie Nicks when she's singing, you know, I keep my visions to myself. And it's just part of growing and learning what matters, what's important, what to protect. And so, you know, these red shoes were really important to this girl. And it was just a disaster, you know, for her to wear them out in front of everybody. So, and remember, you know, what they symbolized. They symbolized her, her beautiful soul, you know, the things that meant a lot to her. So, basically, she kind of goes into, summarize and just hit a couple of points here, because it's, like I said, really an extension of trap number 5 that we covered in the previous video. But she just talks about how, you know, you have to be careful, just like what I was saying, how, you know, even a community can seem rigid, you know, if there's a certain set of beliefs or a certain kind of culture that's standard. You know, you have to really evaluate before you share those pearls. or wear the red shoes, right? You just have to be careful with that. And then yet at the same time, if you're trying to protect those pearls, and you're also simultaneously trying to fit in to this very non-supportive environment or culture or relationship, it's a conflict, and it's a conflict that you're going to have to deal with if you choose to continue to be a part of that community, of that environment, of that relationship. So having to live with that inner conflict is just a decision that each of us needs to make. And so I certainly don't want to influence you there, but I'll just read to you what the book says. It just says, it must be remembered that an oppressed woman not so much refuses to fit as she cannot fit without also dying. Her spiritual integrity is at stake, and she will try to be free in whatever ways are available, even if they put her at risk. So she goes into some extreme examples to make her point in some other countries, and how, you know, strict the regulations and rules of that culture are. And it says, when a woman refuses to support the dry collective, she refuses to stop her wild thinking, and her actions follow accordingly. The red shoes, in essence, you know, the story, teaches us that the wild psyche must be properly protected by unequivocally valuing it ourselves, by speaking out in its interest, by refusing to submit to psychic unhealth. We also learn that the wild, because of its energy and beauty, is always eyed by somebody or other, something or other, some group or other, for trophy purposes, or as a thing to be reduced, altered, ruled on, murdered, redesigned, or controlled. The wild always needs a guardian at the gate, or it will be misused. So that's what narcissism's all about. They're going to look at you as, what can I get from this person? And that's completely fitting in that paragraph right there. So yes, you do have to learn to value yourself and all the different aspects. You really need to learn yourself and who you are, to be able to know, you know, what constitutes your pearls, so that you can, you know, what you can share with a new connection and what you should kind of reserve until trust is earned. And so knowing yourself, learning yourself, is a really important part of this, of protecting your wild self, your soul, your spirit. It says, the problem with the girl in the red shoes is that instead of becoming strong for the fight, she is off in la-la land. You know, like when you're naive, right? Captured by the romance of those red shoes. The important thing about rebellion is that the form it takes be effective. The girl's fascination with the red shoes actually keeps her from a meaningful rebellion, one that would promote change, give a message, and cause an awakening. This reminds me of, I've heard some great advice that and I'm trying to remember how it was expressed, but basically you have to know when is the appropriate time to move forward and relax and let your guard down, and work on your new life and being excited about, you know, anything in your new life, or anything at all, versus when you need to have your guard up, when you need to be focused, when you need to be laser sharp and you're observing and cautionary. It's kind of like you have to discern, you know, how to operate in all those different mannerisms. Does that make sense? So that you, because otherwise it's kind of like you can be in the middle of a war zone, so to speak, right? Hypothetically, or it's metaphorically is what I meant to say. You know, like a war zone metaphorically with narcissists. You know, these snakes, these wolves in sheep's clothing. You can be right in the midst of them, and they can be eyeing you And if you are not discerning in that moment, in that environment, then you're going to be operating with your guard down. So that's the kind of thing where you just have to learn how to be discerning all the time, really. And so it says, we still have the predator in the culture, and it still tries to undercut and destroy all consciousness and all bids for wholeness. There is much truth to the saying that freedoms have to be fought for anew every 20 years. Sometimes it seems that they have to be fought for every 5 minutes. But the wild nature teaches that we meet challenges as they occur. When wolves are badgered, they don't say, "Oh no, not again." They bound, pounce, run, dive, scramble, play dead, go for the throat, whatever needs to be done. So, yes. So, I think that you may start off naive or asleep, again, metaphorically, but once you've gone through these experiences, I think that it's harder to go back to sleep. But like she says, she calls it the predator in the culture, still tries to undercut and destroy all consciousness and all bids for wholeness. I think that it is still some effort on our part. It requires effort on our part to sort of, it feels like you're going against the grain, because a lot of people aren't living this way. They aren't living defensively, with utilizing discernment consciously and intentionally. In other words, a lot of people live with their guard down, either because they haven't been through these experiences yet, or because they have and they haven't learned from them, or because they're someone who benefits. A narcissist, they're living that way. So it kind of can feel sometimes like you're going against the grain when you're, like, say, more reserved than, a social group you may be a part of. You know what I mean? It may kind of feel like, it's just different. You may feel different, but you are going to be different. And you know this, right? After you go through these experiences, it changes you forever. And I think that you get to a point where you don't view that as a bad thing. You view that as a good thing. And so even though you are going against the grain, it's by choice. And you understand the benefit of doing that. You understand what's at stake. You understand what you need to protect. And you understand that also you're going to value things a lot more even than you would have prior to waking up. I feel like you're going to value those pearls even more because you're having to work to protect them even more. And just being conscious, being mindful as you operate from sunup to sundown. That's what it's all about. So trap number 7 is called faking it, trying to be good, normalizing the abnormal. So let's dive into that. It says, as the tale goes on, the girl is chastised for wearing the red shoes to church. Now, though she gazes up at the red shoes on the shelf, she does not touch them. She has, to this point, tried going without her soul life, and that did not work. Next, she tried sneaking a dual life, and that didn't work either. Now, in a last-ditch stand, she tries to be good, it says. The problem with being good is that it does not resolve the underlying shadow issue. And again, it will rise like a tsunami. And I just want to pause here and say that, through our lens of narc recovery and, increasing discernment through that lens, being good in this sense would mean just going along with what's expected of you, in a toxic environment or a relationship. So the problem with being good or pleasing that other person at your expense is that it does not resolve the underlying shadow issue. And again, it will rise like a tsunami, like a giant tidal wave, and rush down, destroying everything in its path. In being good, a woman closes her eyes to everything. Okay, I'm going to have to look up this word. Obdurate, distorted, or damaging around her, and just tries to live with it. Her attempts to accept this abnormal state further injure her wild instincts to react, point out, change, make impact on what is not right, what is not just. And then there's a poem here. It says, Anne Sexton wrote about the fairy tale, The Red Shoes, that we've already covered, and a poem also called The Red Shoes. It says, I stand in the ring in the dead city and tie on the red shoes. They are not mine. They are my mother's, her mother's before, handed down like an heirloom, but hidden like shameful letters. The house and the street where they belong are hidden, and all the women, too, are hidden. Trying to be good, orderly, and compliant in the face of inner or outer peril, or in order to hide a critical psychic or real-life situation, de-souls a woman. It cuts her from her knowing. Excuse me. It cuts her from her ability to act. Like the child in the tale, who does not object out loud, who tries to hide her starvation, who tries to make it seem as though nothing is burning in her. Modern women have the same disorder, normalizing the abnormal. This disorder is rampant across cultures. Normalizing the abnormal causes the spirit, which would normally leap to correct the situation, to instead sink into ennui, complacency, and eventually, like the old woman, into blindness. So next she goes into a study that was conducted in the 60s. And if I'll just encourage you to skip listening about this if you're sensitive it's to these kind of things. But it's a study where they had dogs in cages, and they would shock one side of the cage and the dog would move to the other side. Then they would shock the other side and the dog would move back to the other side. And then it was a behavioral study, obviously, and then they would shock randomly the whole floor of the cage, but it was just random and the dog couldn't tell like when it was going to happen, so it just kind of gave up. And then they wound up opening the door to the cage, but so the dogs could then have freedom, but they didn't leave. They didn't leave the cages. So it says that from this, scientists speculated that when a creature is exposed to violence, it will tend to adapt to that disturbance, so that when the violence ceases or the creature is allowed its freedom, the healthy instinct to flee is hugely diminished and the creature stays put instead. So, although I certainly don't condone studies like this, it is interesting to know that, I think sometimes we can place blame on ourselves. We can condemn ourselves for not getting out of a bad situation sooner. And this is proof that there's an effect on us psychologically. Psychological abuse is a real thing, and it can affect our normal healthy instincts to flee and to protect ourselves. So just keep that in mind. They talk about the term related to that is called learned helplessness. It says there is such loss of meaning when one gives up the life made by hand, that all manner of injuries to psyche, nature, culture, family, and so forth are then allowed to occur. So I think that says a lot, and I think that I don't know if you've experienced this, but I have. If you're trying to understand conditioning, that's essentially what's at work here. That if you, whether you're talking about growing up in a toxic environment with a parent that was abusive, or you're talking about a relationship or anything, it's kind of like, I feel like children are especially vulnerable. That's why I mentioned that as an example. There's something to be said about the different layers of consciousness and the fact that things can actually be ignored on a conscious level. They're there on a subconscious level, and it affects us, and it forms coping mechanisms, in the way that we live. and interacting with the world that can actually be like, blockages to a truly fulfilling and healthy life. And we don't even know. I think sometimes we even, I had a discussion with a friend about this a long time ago, a couple of years ago. I think that a lot of times we can even feel like certain aspects of us are part of our personality, when in reality they're just coping mechanisms. And if we, became conscious of that and healed whatever it is we need to heal, we could release those coping mechanisms, and our personality would almost seem to change to others at that point. You know what I mean? But it's only because we released those coping mechanisms. But the truth is that now we're free to be who we really are, to rest in who God really made us to be, to have that good balance of masculine and feminine energy in the way it needs to be within us. And I think that when that kind of thing happens, that's the point where you're ready and able to connect with a partner in a healthy manner. So those are just some things to think about and to look into. I hope that helps. But let's see here. It says, okay, so the solution is to repair the instincts, basically. It says this normalizing of the shocking, going back to that study that was done, this normalizing of the shocking and abusive is refused. In other words, you're going to stop normalizing bad things by repairing injured instinct. As instinct is repaired, wild woman returns who we truly are. While it is true that there is much to learn by dissolving one's projections, so like it says, you're mean or you hurt me, and looking at how we are mean to ourselves and how we hurt ourselves, this should definitely not be the end of the inquiry. The trap within the trap is thinking that everything is solved by dissolving the projection and finding consciousness in ourselves. Are you catching that? I had to read that and sit with it for a minute myself. I'm going to read that sentence to you again. The trap within the trap is thinking that everything is solved by dissolving the projection. In other words, like blaming somebody else, right, for everything, and just finding consciousness in ourselves instead. It says this is sometimes true and sometimes not. Rather than this either or paradigm, it's either something amiss out there or something awry within me. It is more useful to use an and model. Here is the internal issue, and here is the external issue. This paradigm allows a whole inquiry and far more healing in all directions. And I think that, if you think about it, sometimes we go about life in this manner. I think they can sometimes refer to this as black and white thinking, either or, when in reality the truth is more expansive. The truth is more like a paradox, I think is the appropriate term here. And so it says, the and paradigm is not meant to be used as a blaming model, blaming self or others, but is rather a way of weighing and judging accountability, both inner and outer, and what needs to be changed, applied for, adumbrated. I'm going to be putting a lot of vocabulary terms down in the description for you guys. This may make sense to you. This is new for me. It stops fragmentation for a woman to seek to mend all within her reach, neither slighting her own needs nor turning away from the world. So, because none of it's perfect. We're not perfect. The world isn't perfect. Other people aren't perfect. And I think that's just such wise advice, to just step back and take a look at it all. And I think sometimes we just get impatient and we want the healing to come in a hurry. And it just, sometimes unconsciously, it may be convenient for us to just blame somebody else. But if you live that way constantly, then that's really kind of a narcissistic trait. You know what I mean? To never take accountability and responsibility. So I think it's just more of an approach at being well-rounded, to just gather as much information as you can for your discernment. So it's really this whole experience of learning about narcissism and, you know, firsthand going through it, is an opportunity to catapult ourselves into huge growth. And I feel like with growth comes potential. And so in that aspect, you know, it's kind of like, I think sometimes beautiful things can come out of bad things. And so I hope this has been helpful for you. We have trap number 8 next, called Dancing Out of Control, Obsession and Addiction. She has a whole section on addiction, and then it goes into at the executioner's house, specifically trying to take the shoes off too late, and then returning to life made by hand, healing injured instincts. So she is going to go into that a little bit further, like what we just touched on today. So thank you guys again. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you soon. Have a beautiful day.